Together, we are changing the course of history.
And handing down new stories to our children.
Together,
our voices are amplified.
In powerful and creative ways.
It's not always easy.
Pero cuando estamos juntos,
anything is possible.
Together.
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 Juntos.
Together.
Together.
We rise.
Together We Rise is a mission here at KENS 5 to spotlight the challenges of diversity and inclusion.
That's right. We started the series 1 year ago, vowing to explore the issues that divide us while also making room for all that unites us.
Our team examines the problems and highlights the solutions while speaking to the difference makers who are making a call for action. The goal is to make us better together.
And over the next hour, we'll dive into topics like the digital divide, racial tension in policing, and how the Spanish language was stolen from a generation of Latinos.
So we are asking you to take this journey with us and see how together we rise. The story was police and race because that's where the conflict is, generally between people of color and police. So that was the origin of the basic name of it. And it came about because there was such an outcry across the nation and in this community about what people viewed as injustices with police departments across the country, even here in San Antonio. And the George Floyd moment certainly energize the country towards speaking about these things, looking at those things. And I think the challenges have always been just getting to the bottom of the story, getting the real truth.
Well, I was talking to a lady just recently who was in tears after explaining to me that her son just turned 16 and she had to sit down and have the famous talk with him, explaining to him that because he was a young black man, that he didn't have the same rights that others had and enjoyed freely in this country. That if he was pulled over, he was to behave in a certain manner and that he had no rights, he must shut up, he must, basically he must bow down in all ways because he has no rights when it comes to dealing with people of authority. But yet we have to continue having these talks with our children because we know that their lives can be taken so easily and that if they are taken, there will be no accountability for that.
My son actually put a plastic cover at his door that he has his registration, driver's license, and insurance information that he keeps right there. So if he gets pulled over, he doesn't have to make any sudden movements. He literally will just go like this and hand it to the officer. Our young men shouldn't have to live that way. They shouldn't have to. They shouldn't have to live this way.
So when you have distrust that is generational, that has been passed on, fear that is generational, that not only has root, but has reason and evidence, it is really hard to get people to come to the table sometimes and say, hey, trust us, we've changed.
For me, I think policing and race probably best boils down to understanding implicit bias.
There shouldn't be a fear. There shouldn't be the sense of trying to avoid police officers. We're here for everyone.
It's not necessarily that they're bad so much as they are very resistant to change and any type of losing any sort of power for them, right? I don't feel like they're fully as connected with the community and what's going on for us as they should be.
We have done so much changing our policies, revising our policies, implementing policies to make sure that our policies are the best out there as they pertain to our practices on the street and the way we deal with people on on the street. How do we get the word out that all these things are being done? Because apparently they're not right now getting out the way I'd like them to get out, to let people know.
I've been called Uncle Tom, you're a sellout, how can you even wear that uniform? You think like them, you act like them, and we haven't even had a conversation. They know nothing about me. I'm here because a situation has gotten to the point where the police need to be involved, and it just happens to be me, a black man in uniform.
We don't want to strip away their ability to be law enforcement. I think people just want a different way. And for police officers, they hear the cry, but no pun intended, they don't want to be handcuffed. You know what I mean? They want to be able to do their duties and have the public trust them. And that's what I got from my interviews with them, is that they want to feel that sense of honor. They want the community to really trust them.
I remember those vivid scenes from the Pettus Bridge. I remember that. And I remember there were police officers, and there were dogs, and there were fire hoses. That's an image that is going to keep me from basically wiping the slate clean and seeing all policing as an innocent exercise of authority.
We have the ability right now to really change things in America, to pivot and change how we look at race in America, how we look at police in America, and how those two interact.
The general public has, I think, an impression now that the George Floyd cases of tragedies are normative, and they're not at all. What you don't see is the tens of thousands of police-citizen encounters that go perfectly fine, right?
It's kind of hard to say, hey, guess what, guys? We didn't shoot this guy today because this is what we did. That's not something that you put out on social media.
But if you were to talk with police officers after the fact, I think in most of those instances, you might conclude that they were not consciously racist, but they did go into those interactions with what very often is an unconscious set of understandings and stereotypes that then color their actions.
So there's systemic racism, over-policing, militarization of policing, microaggressions. Rather than fighting against this or ignoring people's perils, tuning in and paying attention to what they're saying. And so if we could get this to translate to our police departments, we'll be much better off.
All you got to do is look around the country and see what happened when somebody says, hey, I'm pulling out my wallet, and boom, or, I mean, there's videos out there that justify that fear.
The accountability is there. The problem is that there's been some issues where people have gotten off on technicalities.
At the end of the day, when we're looking at accountability and safety, I think we all have the same goals. We just not seen eye to eye on them.
Here we are in 2021 saying we want justice. At some certain point, you have to just become the justice that you want to see, right?
At this particular time, at this particular juncture, with the relationships between police and the community, it's a time of healing. It's a time of rebuilding.
And as far as I'm concerned, I love to use this phrase, there's no finish line. We are about continuous improvement in everything that we do. Everything.
So there was this thought that when the trial happened with George Floyd, that verdict was going to be some turning point for the community. And Yes, the officer was convicted, the former officer was convicted. Yes, he has pleaded to other charges. In a sense, I guess those who were looking for some justice got that, but where did that really take us? You see like countless men and women of color dying, whether black or brown. But then you see officers who get killed too in situations, taken out for no reason. You see officers who want to protect this community because that's who we call on. That's who we empower to take care of us. So when you get to that intersection, I don't know that there are ever going to be any easy answers, but all we can do is try.
Murals have always served as a form of public protest.
It's something that you can't ignore. That's a lot of the issue is people of color often feel unheard. We create these platforms where we can't be ignored.
An outreach set to inspire everyday people where they live.
Those are pieces that become San Antonio icons. Public art becomes part of your life.
Proving the power behind the paint can have a long-lasting effect. Watch this full story at kens5.com/rise. Coming up
on Together We Rise. A digital divide growing wider in the pandemic.
Causes such a huge deficit for our families and students on a daily basis.
Students of color lacking access to the internet at home.
You're in essence saying like 30 years ago, hey, you're not allowed to take home your books and study.
The disadvantage for kids in our community and the solutions to get all kids plugged in.
This is a 200-meter race. One racer gets a 100-meter head start. Then I say go, right? So what is the likelihood of that person who started 100 meters behind ever being able to catch up? It's very difficult and in most cases impossible, right? And in no ways are we blaming the runner with the head start. It has nothing to do with that. We have to revisit the rules of the race. So I think when you're looking at inequity, it's much more than a slight head start or a slight advantage. It's huge. And at the same time, we're looked at to produce and have the same results. And often, if we don't, the blame is not placed on that head start, which is the system. The blame is placed on the runner who was at a disadvantage. And I think when we begin to look at it from that perspective, we can get a better idea of how to build equity within our communities, especially as it relates to education and this digital divide that causes such a huge deficit for our families and students on a daily basis.
The digital divide is a gap between the haves and the have-nots. Those who have access to reliable internet services, quality devices, and digital literacy, and those who do not, which happen to be low-income communities of color.
The internet is the great equalizer, but yet we're not all equal. Black and brown students have the least amount of access to high-quality internet connections. Here in San Antonio specifically, we kind of refer to it almost like digital redlining. You grew up on the west side or the east side or in southwest Bexar County, there's probably a really high likelihood that you don't have a paid internet subscription in your household. And more than likely, if you do have the internet, you're accessing it from a cell phone.
In districts like SAISD, which is made up of 95% black and brown students, only 40% of those students have access to reliable internet at home.
You're in essence saying like 30 years ago, hey, you're not allowed to take home your books and study. It's an inequity. They need these tools to be successful, period. We need to make sure that we are giving everyone the same, kind of starting point and letting them take off and be as successful as others.
The leaders of the Digital Inclusion Alliance of San Antonio are calling our city to action. They say no matter how large the gap, we can close it if we all come together.
With the digital divide being this three-strand cord of access to internet, access to devices, and of course access to information, we have in San Antonio all of the pieces that we need to close the digital divide. When you have all these people who hold a piece of the bridge and you're looking at the gap is no longer the problem. Now the problem is, how do we bring them all together and build this bridge? And I know we have to do it together.
Now, nationally, almost 30% of households do not have internet connection. Here in the greater Bexar County, San Antonio area, 1 in 5 households don't have internet connection.
They call it digital redlining. There's a huge need to keep up and to have equity so that all income levels have access to technology, which is now the roads and highways of commerce and participation. Digital inclusion is economic inclusion.
The last couple of years, the pandemic has really exposed so many different niches and voids out in our communities. You know, I think it takes advocacy still of school districts, parents, of our communities to go in and talk about what gaps are still there. From an education standpoint, we still know that access to internet is an issue. SAISD is a great illustration. They have Chromebooks, but individuals and students don't have the access. You know, you have a family of 5 in the household. Yes, they may have the tool to access the internet, but they may not have the internet itself.
I heard about this grandma who has 3 grandchildren that she is fully responsible for as legal guardian, and she's parking at a coffee shop at crazy hours in the night so that her grandkids can do their homework on a cell phone just to get the free Wi-Fi. That's a more dramatic case of what it looks like when you're on the wrong side of the digital divide. But this grandmother's working and trying to take care of these babies, and they're trying to get their homework done on an old cell phone. Our hope with doing this story and creating this conversation is to provide a place where everybody can bring their ideas to the table and their resources. And I really think that we can close that gap for South Texas if we do it together.
We didn't just get here accidentally, it's actual policies that have created this. So there are actually policies and laws that we can create or have been created to create opportunity. During the pandemic, it was the height of the pandemic, and we adopted the Connected Beyond the Classroom model in order to address remote learning. San Antonio has vast fiber infrastructure, and schools, likewise, some of them have fiber infrastructure to do their work, right? Well, the idea was just to turn it outward into the community so that for many, many years to come, because the infrastructure lasts 35, 40 years, there would be no chance of any student being enrolled in these low-income schools to not have access.
I think it takes advocacy still of school districts, of parents, of our communities to go in and talk about what gaps are still there. That's why USAA has stepped up with a 3-year, $50 million commitment to advance the lives of individuals through our diversity, equity, and inclusion portfolio.
I see so much opportunity right now because of who all is coming together. And these young people, they're going to be the experts. It's not going to be me. They're going to change the world.
I'm Sean Elliott, and my story began a long time ago. I've experienced racism for as long as I can remember. As a kid in elementary school, believe it or not, I've fought pretty much every single day. One of my worst childhood experiences was when the miniseries Roots came out. That was a nightmare for me because I was one of only 2 black kids in class, and when we would discuss the miniseries in class, everybody would turn around and look at me like I was an expert on African culture and slaves. I got nicknamed Kunta Kinte, that was one. That caused fights every day. Chicken George or things like that. And, you know, at that point, that was like, you know, it was instilled in you that you were different, you weren't the same, and you were less than. I think it's hard for a lot of people to realize that racism exists, and it has existed. And I think a lot of people now with cameras are starting to realize exactly what minorities, people of color go through every day in this country. I still, to this day, will experience racism, especially when I'm not in San Antonio, when I'm somewhere else and people don't know me. People see me and they don't know anything about me. They just see a big, tall black man, and you see the fear. You see how they're ready to, you know, retreat or defend themselves. The only way we're going to combat racism is that we have to have an honest conversation, plain and simple. This country has not had an honest conversation about race. And an honest conversation involves people that are willing to listen and hear what we're saying, even if it's uncomfortable. Living in my skin is a virtual panel discussion that I think is incredibly powerful. It's a way for Black leaders to come together, share their stories, share their ideas about how we can actively fight racism in this country. There were words that were spoken that I needed to hear. You know, sometimes you feel like you're in it by yourself, and then you hear all these other Black men talking about the same thing, and you're just like, yeah, you know, I feel you. It was like therapy to hear these guys. You know, those guys were just really inspiring. I'm Sean Elliott, and this is my story.
You know, we often see images of unaccompanied children at the border, separated and detained, but we rarely get to see what happened to those who get to stay here legally and make a life here in the United States. Here's Anastasia Bolton.
Second chances are a beautiful thing, but they can come at a cost. Oscar Gonzalez knows. He first felt it when he was just 7 years old.
It's hard. It's really hard.
His mom left Honduras and her kids.
I didn't understand what was happening, you know.
To find a better way to feed them, to work in the United States, to find her second chance.
I probably thought it was just gonna be a regular, that she was gonna go work and then come back later, you know.
When you're 7, you can't really grasp what mom is doing and why. You just miss seeing her. Oscar just missed his mom.
It was really hard for all of us.
Oscar lived with grandma, had to drop out during middle school and work.
Back home, if you want to go to school, it's a lot of money you have to pay. And also, there's a lot of responsibility that you have, that you need to work.
10 years after his mom left at 17, and against her advice, he decided to make his own way to the U.S.
That's what I started to think about, the second chance that I wanted in life. You know, I wanted to go to school. I wanted to have a decent job. And I was kind of scared. You hear a lot of, stories that, some people, they leave their house and they never come back.
Oscar says he walked a lot of the way and took the train known as La Bestia to get closer to the border.
They tell you not to fall asleep, but it just, the night is too long, days are too long. They will fall asleep, and the next thing you heard, just someone falls to the wheels. And trust me, you just heard that scream at nighttime. It's terrifying. It's horrible, and you don't know. You don't know what to do. So you just pray to God, asking Him to help you to get where you need to be, and you try to move on.
Oscar says he crossed the border in Laredo, eventually surrendered to Border Patrol, and was released from detention to his mom, seeing her for the first time since he was a little boy.
I opened the door and I see this short woman. I closed the door and I turned back around. I did not recognize her.
The price of second chances is high.
The only thing I knew about her was her voice.
But the rewards are what push us to try.
I remember I hugged her and I couldn't believe it. I was like, Mom, I'm so sorry, but I couldn't recognize you. It was a beautiful moment.
There have been many beautiful moments in the decades since. High school graduation, college, love. An immigration judge granted Oscar permanent residency.
My name is Richard Walton, and I was an immigration judge for 26 years, just retired this summer.
Judge Walton was Oscar's judge.
It's very stressful. You have to look at people that are really nice and gentle and tell them no. And then you have to look at people that are real scum and tell them yes. Because you're sworn to follow the law.
It's not the American dream, it's my dream.
We showed him our recent story about Oscar. He didn't remember him, too many cases over 26 years. Of those, really none, where Judge Walton got to see what people did with their second chances.
That's really sweet. And see, people ask for another chance, and he took advantage of it. I mean, everyone says, oh, I want to get a job, I want to send money to my family and so forth, but he actually did. That's why we do this.
Well, let me show you then what he had to say to you.
Okay.
Are you nervous?
Yes.
And I would like to tell him to thank him, you know. This is what I'm turning into it. And I'm pretty sure that he will not, he's not gonna, I mean, he will be proud because I've been working hard for it. And probably he don't know, but I've been trying to do my best.
It's wonderful. Actually, it's wonderful. He's taking care of his family, he's loving somebody, and what else is there?
And that is thanks enough.
And like to think that there's dozens and dozens of more people like that that are very happy.
For the first time ever, a group of attention-shy benefactors opens the doors to what they do.
We just want to do good things, do kind things, and inspire others to do the same.
Every member selects a month to carry out a random act of kindness anonymously.
It genuinely is spirit-led.
So if you get a card like this one, then the kindness crew has sought you out.
Never believe that a few caring people can't change the world. You can do it one act at a time.
Watch this full story at kens5.com/rise.
Next on Together We Rise.
Latino millennials who don't speak Spanish questioned about why.
Everyone says that you should. You're Mexicana.
The history of systemic racism and suppression of the language.
Kind of turned us against each other.
Tensions within the Mexican-American community and prejudice inside school walls.
You're not supposed to speak Spanish?
He would hit you with a paddle.
Why some feel Spanish was stolen from a generation, and the fight now to recover it.
We are the makers of old magic. The have been and the always will be. La gente de las semillas, lluvia y sol. Hand in hand we carry each other beyond cosmos. And I would love to say one word, una palabra, could capture all of our lightning essence. Latina, Latino, Latine, Hispanic, Latinx. Sabes que you can't. One word ain't enough. Like love, like love, like love. One word ain't enough.
Together We Rise, you know, it was started by a group of our colleagues, our black colleagues, and I saw what they were doing and I was very inspired. It was my first story with the Together We Rise team. It was a story I felt really passionate about because I had heard the stories of my parents and grandparents and what they experienced being Latino, growing up, you know, Hispanic. So that's why I was passionate about it and wanting to get it out there. And we made the connection of just how ironic it is that these days we have whole schools dedicated to teaching your children dual languages, Spanish and English. And now people my age, millennials, whose parents dealt with, you know, the world of hurt because they couldn't speak it, they've lost it. And they're now the outcasts because they don't speak it and they're ashamed in public.
So say your first and last name.
Joshua Amparan.
Do you speak Spanish?
Not well. I can understand it a lot more than I can speak it.
Michelle Murals.
What's the most common thing you hear when you say no?
Why you should. Everyone says that you should. You're Mexicana. I'm used to it now. It doesn't bother me any, but you know, for a long time I wondered why wasn't I taught Spanish?
I will say a lot of the people that I grew up with had similar upbringings where their parents were more fluent in Spanish.
So the story came about after a lot of discussion, you know, not only with everything that was going on in the country, but also a lot in-house inside the KENS 5 building. You know, we're talking about diversity and equity, and someone had mentioned, you know, well, we didn't get to speak Spanish in schools. You know, Latinos also suffered injustices, and a lot of people were surprised about that.
I think there's more people because they said, pues, ¿quién es esta gringa? You know, ¿quién es esta gringa tan prieta? Está más prieta que yo. Está más prieta que yo y mira, no puede ni hablar español. You know, ¿y qué? Since I was in the military, you know, my wife and I traveled a lot. And so our children moved a lot and they were educated in Department of Defense schools. And so they never really had a chance to practice their Spanish except with us at home. People would automatically go up to my daughter, who's just as dark-skinned as I am, and start speaking Spanish to her, and then get after her for not speaking Spanish, you know. And she'd say, Dad, you know, these people are actually getting, some of them almost violent with me.
So here in San Antonio, in South Texas, you know, language has been at the very center of a number of discriminatory policies and actions, at the center of you know, the disinvestment in different communities, you know, and so we kind of have to begin really early on. So for most of the 19th century, Spanish was meant to be on an equitable plane with English, at least on the books, but that's not how it played out in every day.
During that time, there was signs all over the school, bathrooms, doors, everything, say it in English. I still remember it was a white sign with red lettering, but what bothered me the most was the fact that it kind of turned us against each other.
And those English-only mandates are what colored most of ethnic Mexican experiences in education and primary school education throughout the first half of the 20th century. So even though Mexican students can now go to, you know, schools with white folks, they still can't speak Spanish in school. And oftentimes students who speak Spanish in school are punished in any number of ways.
In school, I remember also speaking it or just turning around to say something in Spanish, and then, Erlinda, go to the office. They would hit you with a paddle.
I recall hearing that they would have to pay a penny every time they were caught saying something in Spanish, or they would get paddled also.
And the kids started picking at me because they went, hey, you don't speak Spanish? I go, no, I understand it, but I don't speak it. But who in the heck do you think you are, white? And on the playground, I said something, and I don't recall what it was. It wasn't nothing derogatory, but I say something, and somebody gets a teacher, you're not supposed to speak Spanish? And I go, I'm just trying to learn. What are you talking about? That really stigmatized me. It really did, because I was punished, I was paddled, and all that. And, you know, I think to myself, I want to learn English, yeah, but we went through a lot. It lasted all through elementary school, and I don't remember when they changed it, but I think we were in junior high before those signs started coming down.
I'm absolutely shocked every time I hear it, because I know from my perspective as a black person, oh yeah, we experience racism, but for anybody else, I'm absolutely shocked.
It struck a chord with me because I grew up hearing these stories from my parents. My dad grew up in San Antonio, my mom grew up in Houston, and you know, while they were here many generations, and you know, we weren't first generation, you know, they did speak Spanish, and my mom told me a story about her getting in trouble on the playground, just how these students got in trouble on the playground. And you know, I could resonate with them with those stories.
Remember, a lot of these parents went through this very same school system, right? And so what begins to happen by the 50s is that there are, you know, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of folks who are no longer learning Spanish at home or are actively being repressed from speaking Spanish out in the streets.
Well, Mama attended Edgewood Elementary, and she says she recalls clearly being in the 3rd grade and still struggling with her English. So then when we came around, when she had her children, she promised that we were going to be English only because that was the language that she felt we needed to learn.
Mom would just tell me that it just came down to school, you know, being in school, being treated different because you spoke the language, and just to protect us from all of that, they just decided, you know, just strictly English.
You know, I think just the fact that I know that they were trying to mold us by forcing us to learn English so that we could be assimilated, you know, into the mainstream. I know the intentions, you know, were good, but the manner in which it was done and the results, I never felt were good.
The result is that now, if we're looking at 2021, there are generations of Latinos who don't speak Spanish as a result of this deep history of language suppression.
In today's society, there's whole schools that are dedicated to dual language. You know, how ironic is that?
You know, it's explained by this history. You know, we're still looking at a really large population of students who just plain lost Spanish. The tensions within different communities, in this particular case, Mexican-American, Mexican communities around Spanish, and whether one speaks Spanish or doesn't speak Spanish, oftentimes don't come from a place of really great historical knowledge. But there are generations of folks who lost it because of the systematic racism and the systematic suppression of the Spanish language.
My kids personally, you know, I want them to know Spanish. My twins take Spanish classes to try to get to speak Spanish.
My older son is actually probably more fluent in Spanish than I am. And I know now my father tries to talk to him almost exclusively in Spanish.
I think it's important that, you know, we recover, at least in some way, that language that was stolen from us, or that was, you know, if stolen is too harsh of a term for some people, that language that was denied us in some way, right? So that's an important part of just identifying who you are, especially in a place like Texas, which is a bilingual, you know, capital in this country.
I got a lot of people appreciative that we brought this up, that, you know, people realized that the Latino community, you know, did feel a lot of the pressures of racism throughout South Texas for a very long time. That's why we're doing these stories, because there hasn't been a solution. And maybe there never will be, but maybe we can educate people to just be better.
I remember going to the ambulance, and I said, Elwood, and he was like, Mama, I can't feel my legs. Then I turned around and looked and said, oh my gosh, they shot him in his back.
The bullet left Hardiman paralyzed. Growing up in the inner city prepared him to take a bullet.
Why am I molded to be prepared for something? That's not normal. I didn't sign up for the Marines.
The years of recovery have been physically painful, but he's too determined.
I am a statistic.
Of a different kind.
I'm gonna be a 3rd generation mental health worker.
Watch this full story at kens5.com/rise.
Next.
On Together We Rise.
A flood raged through San Antonio 1 century ago.
They talked about a monster entering San Antonio, and nothing could stop this monster.
West Side neighborhoods devastated, and dozens of lives lost.
People, almost entirely of Spanish surname, who died, swept away in the middle of that night in September.
Residents rising up for change, and the fight still happening 100 years later. A major flood swept through San Antonio in 1921, killing dozens and destroying homes.
For decades, the West Side, home to a majority of Hispanic population, continued to see tragedy. Erica Zuko shares a lesson in taking action and learning from history.
The beauty and peace of San Antonio's river and creeks can turn to something else when the rain comes.
Every other block
It's flooding.
Most locals remember the flood of '98, the floods of the '70s, some of the '50s and '60s.
People were still dying every year, and the neighborhood would be cut off by the high water.
But there's a less-known disaster from 100 years ago.
They talked about a monster entering San Antonio, and nothing could stop this monster.
The choices that followed.
It is, to my mind at least, the single most important event that happened in the city.
Reveal the impact of decisions by local leaders and the power of everyday San Antonians. On the 6th floor of San Antonio's Central Library rest pages and photos depicting the flood of 1921. There are familiar landmarks of today, surrounded by water that swept around 2,000 people into the streets.
People, almost entirely of Spanish surname, who died, swept away in the middle of that night in September 9/10.
Char Miller, author of the book West Side Rising, unearthed pages of names, paying tribute to those who perished. Some now buried, not all marked, at San Fernando Cemetery 1. They were swept into raging waters that came as the river and creeks rose. It was a time before the Almost Dam, Riverwalk, or San Antonio River Authority played a role in control. The storm hit the whole city, but Miller's research shows West Side neighborhoods took a really hard hit.
People are coming in from Mexico, and they're building houses with not much money. So they're all, instead of on this concrete walkway that we're doing, you've got little casitas all over the place.
There were houses here.
Houses all around.
Those houses were destroyed, and a large number of what Miller says were likely more than 80 deaths came from the West Side. Graciela Sanchez of the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, who grew up near this creek, says even decades later, not enough was done. And with torrential downpours came more flooding and more loss.
We shouldn't be left, as secondary citizens, and yet in 2021, 100 years after this flood of 1921, we still live in very similar conditions and with many of the same problems.
Much of the post-storm response was focused on downtown. The city built the Almost Dam to protect buildings and preserve business.
The logic was economic. We need to do the things that are going to save the downtown buildings, right? And where the poor people live, not so much.
It took grassroots action to start getting results. Residents organized communities organized for public service, known as COPs, to petition for infrastructure improvements. Their advocacy made waves, and they pushed for the election of Hispanic and neighborhood leaders to office. As a U.S. representative, Henry B. Gonzalez championed federal funding for flood control and housing. As mayor, Henry Cisneros worked to fix problems he'd seen firsthand.
When I was growing up, people died pretty much every spring when the Apache Creek exceeded its bounds and people were drowned and houses were washed away. So San Antonio waited a long time before it did the right and fair thing.
In 2010, Mayor Julian Castro celebrated the opening of the first linear creekway on the west side. Today, overflowing creeks don't take lives like they did, though some say there's still work to do.
The inner city is taken care of through all these great drainage ditches that cops and everybody work for, so that's a great part. But there's still some lacking areas that are being missed by the city.
Ben Acovio has lived near Park and Brazos off and on for 66 years. Whenever it rains, he says, the street floods.
Our concern for our neighborhood is the drainage for the kids, so the kids can get to school.
Acovio says much of the answer can be found in the voices of neighbors.
Let's be proactive in everything that we do. We asked the voters to come out and vote. They did, okay? We have good city council people in there. Now let's make them work for the election that we got.
Councilwoman Terry Castillo represents District 5 on the west side.
So one, we already know due to redlining that this is the most economically poor area of the city. But in addition to that, it's some of the city's oldest housing stock. So by failing to address the drainage and flooding issues, we're allowing for the continuation of the deterioration.
She's encouraging her constituents to speak up so changes can be made to budgets and on bond issues. while preserving current housing costs.
So when we talk about environmental justice, we need to ensure that we're prioritizing and centering people.
There will be other things. Heat. If we go through additional climate change and global warming, what do we need to be doing to protect people related to the heat?
Using the losses and lessons of the past.
We've done an enormous amount to protect ourselves, but we owe an incredible debt of thanks to those who frequently perished on the West Side, not just in 21 flood, but in many subsequent ones.
To create a stronger San Antonio for all.
I actually got to do a story about the evolution of Barbie, dolls that I grew up playing with when I was younger, and back in the early 2000s, there weren't a lot of mixed race dolls and dolls that looked like me. And so growing up, I always felt like an outsider. And it's funny because I went into the story thinking, oh, other kids are gonna feel like outsiders too, and what has Barbie really done? And I interviewed them and I said, hey, you know, what dolls do you have there? And do you feel like the doll looks like you? Do you ever feel different from the doll? Do you wish that you looked? None of them said that their dolls didn't look like them, that they felt alienated. And it was like I stepped out of a time machine or something. And to see the progress that has been made so far in that area was so beautiful. And I thought, wow, things are changing.
Barbie, you're beautiful.
Have you heard what's happened? Barbie's changed.
With All-American Barbie, you get all-American fun. She's an all-American beauty and a friend rolled into one.
If you grew up playing with dolls, chances are you had a Barbie.
I pretty much have Barbie and her sister Chelsea.
Or two.
She has quite a few.
And if you were lucky, Barbie looked just like you. These days, Barbie looks a lot different than she did during your childhood. And even vintage pop-ups that are bringing generations of Barbie lovers together are a reminder of the evolution.
She had a set of 5 Barbies that came with the Barbie truck, and they were all different sizes, shades, ethnicities, and also body types.
But you may not notice the deeper impact of why these changes matter unless your name is Dr. Dorinda Roll.
Actually, I did not. I did not grow up playing with Barbies.
Are you kidding?
But she did have other dolls.
Growing up, all of my dolls were white dolls. I remember real vividly having a Chatty Cathy doll, with it being a white doll. The hair was different in a style that I could never get my hair in. The eyes were different. Everything was different about that doll. You didn't have that choice of a black doll or a white doll. They were all white dolls. But what it did was to put in me a belief and a feeling as a child that that doll was prettier.
A study in the 1940s done by psychologists Kenny and Mamie Clark,
the doll experiment,
showed that she wasn't the only child who felt this way. In the experiment, children were asked to compare a white doll and a black doll.
Even the black children said the black doll was the ugly doll. The black doll was the bad doll. So all of these negative influences come in when children have images that don't look like them.
While baby dolls existed, the earliest release of brown Barbie dolls began with Mattel's Christy and Francie dolls. They were both introduced in 1967 and 1968, but were only marketed as Barbie's friends. The original black Barbie debuted in 1980. This is 21 years after the original white fashion Barbie made her New York City debut. But calls for diversity grew on, and Barbie and Mattel responded.
If there is a way to make money in response to the market, they will do that. They created more diverse options because that's money you're leaving on the table for a competitor to come in and to create another doll.
And now Barbie is available in more than 20 different skin tones with dolls based off of real-world scientists and artists of color. In a statement on Barbie's main website, the brand acknowledges that while great strides have been made in its product and content over the past few years, there is more to be done. From the looks of it, since June of 2020, they have done more. Today, the love of Barbie dolls lives on in the little hands that hold them and the larger hands that hold theirs.
I'm gonna play with my Barbie.
The Land of Opportunity has the responsibility to create a world where kids of all shapes, shades, and sizes can dream, and every opportunity that's taken to learn from a dimmer yesterday leads to new possibilities for a brighter tomorrow.
To see little girls confident and excited, and then playing with these dolls that give them a sense of possibility. Like their future and their outlook on life is just so different than mine was growing up, because I felt so lost. I felt so alone, and like no one would be able to understand, you know, my hair or my skin color or why I sound white, you know? So it was amazing just to see all these little girls go, no, I'm actually good. Like, and it was really encouraging to me, because I think about kids that I'm gonna have one day. And I don't think I would have had that experience if I wasn't a part of this project.
I think it's really special that, you know, we are wanting to bring this all together and, you know, show people what we've been doing with Together We Rise in this first year of its infancy. And I really hope people take it all in and see some of the lessons in these stories.
Together We Rise is not an exclusive thing where it's just about one particular community. It's an encompassing project and initiative to speak to every community, and really we want to focus on those people who feel unheard and they feel underrepresented.
The more we can tell the story and communicate to each other how we are all together supporting each other, that one company can make a difference.
There's a multitude of different voices, different genders, different experiences that are all contributing to this common goal.
Together as a community, we all can rise if we support each other.
I see so much opportunity right now because of who all is coming together, that you all began to capture in Together We Rise, and that is that now we have all the pieces of the puzzle.
We produce more Together We Rise stories, which you can watch on kens5.com/rise, or you can go to youtube.com/kens5.
And the Rise team will continue to bring you more content on Tuesday nights on Eyewitness News at 10. So if you have anything you'd like for us to tackle, just send us an email to news@kens5.com.
We pledge to continue delving into complex topics and searching for a solution that can make us all better together.
Thank you so much for joining us as we leave. Final spoken word from Mantechi.
Let us rise as one. We are inspired by Carmelita Torres's boldness and Howard Thurman's sermons of justice. We are determined to speak up for the mute and to fight for the destitute, to find rest for the oppressed and to stay connected to you. For we've learned that together we rise over fear and evil, that we are stronger as one people, not two. And if we come together, if we love one another, if we recognize that our neighbor is our brother and our orphan is our child, if ever we reconcile the truth with history, we will rise out of this valley of discord onto a mountain of peace, where our streets will no longer flow with the tears from the innocent, and we won't oppress the immigrant, but love every soul that strolls through this sweet land of liberty. We don't have to wait for tragedy to strike to unite. We must find harmony without terror, and we must find it now, for the hour has come. Let us rise as one.